Hello and welcome to Juliet and Lucy's Quiet Leadership Revolution, the podcast for senior and aspiring leaders who want to make their voice heard and their impact felt through thoughtful, reflective, confident leadership. I'm Juliet Corbett. I'm an executive coach and strategist, and I work one-to-one with senior leaders, guiding them to find their strategic focus, empower their teams, and regain control over their time.
I'm Lucy Gower. I'm a facilitator, trainer and coach, and I empower leaders to build their happy, confident and high-performing teams. Today we've taken a listener request for this episode, and we're going to talk about a leadership situation where perhaps you have to step out or step down could be for a whole range of different reasons, but how you navigate that in terms of your leadership and actually more broadly in terms of kind of where you are within your overall career path. So Juliet, over to you to kick us off.
Yeah, I think it's really an interesting topic. This is something that people don't talk about the detail much. We all know that careers are less linear than they used to be. People are making more career changes and shifts. There are also trends around, obviously, I suppose we've got more women in the workplace than we used to. And so there are trends around both men and women taking time out for children, to look after elderly parents, for their own health reasons, other goals and ambitions that they have that may be outside work. So I think there is an acceptance that a career is much more fluid and you have more choice now than we used to have, or they used to be assumed. People talk about it in the abstract a bit. But what I think was really interesting about this listener request is this was more of a concrete experience that this listener had around stepping back. And I think in their case, they'd stepped into a less senior role for a period of time, were in a very senior leadership position, have stepped into a different organization in a more junior position or slightly less senior position. And what that means for them and their career. But actually, when I read it, it's really interesting, Lucy, I was telling you this before, I'm very happy to acknowledge, as I was reading what the listener had written, I was interpreting it through my lens of navigating exactly this and thinking about what would be most useful for people to hear. Because I think actually a lot of this isn't talked about in the kind of the lived experience, the reality of what it's like to actually navigate these transitions in our careers.
So the first thing that I want to pick up on is something that you just said around, we talk about it in the abstract. So, you know, we've all got lives and work and they intermingle, and there'll be points where you're perhaps going through some sort of transition or there's a need to take a step back into a role that is perhaps less senior, or maybe it's adjacent to something that you're already doing, or it doesn't follow a linear career path, and that is becoming more and more normal. However, the bit for me is how it feels to do that. So in the abstract, yes, I've taken a step back into a different role because I'm looking after my parents and looking after my own health. But actually, once you do that, how it feels, I think from my experience of coaching people, is entirely different. So I'd like us to start at that bit. How it feels versus the abstract.
So one thing that I think is really important here is identity. I think most of us, I firmly put myself in this camp, most of us don't stop to think about what our identity is. We just get on with life. But when something like this happens, and sometimes it's planned and sometimes, let's be honest, it's not planned, it's just kind of the way life works out, there's something about identity that shifts or gets challenged in these changes, which unless we can identify and be aware that that's what's causing a discomfort, I think that it can lead to quite a lot of negative emotion. It can lead to quite a lot of frustration and feeling of kind of being trapped or stuck. And it's realizing that it's the identity that we had with our previous leadership job title. Our identity was rooted somewhat in that job title. So removing ourselves from that role leaves us feeling a little bit lost. So I think there's a big piece of this is around identity, and then mirrored to that values as well, our core values, which tend to stay more stable through our lifetime.
So how much identity do you attach to your job role, whatever that is?
Yeah,
And I'm guessing the tighter the connection, the more difficult it feels. And is
yeah,
there something about having to let go and almost grieve the old identity in order to embrace the new identity, even if you've chosen to do it, even if it's a
yeah,
deliberate choice? And I
yeah.
suppose unpicking that, a conversation with a trusted friend, colleague, or coach
Hmm.
can help with that, I think. But you started to
Yeah,
mention values, Juliet, and I'm interested in hearing a bit more.
yeah. So the way I see values is they're normally fairly static through your lifetime. You might shift and change slightly the emphasis, you might put different words on. In fact, if you listen to our episode about hope previously, you'll hear I just renamed one of my values,
Mm,
so it does shift and change, but they tend to be fairly static. And what we find is that when a value that we have is either challenged or
mm,
missing in our life, then we feel it through an emotion. So for example, and actually throughout this episode, I'm going to be modeling the vulnerability episode that we did a
mhm.
couple of kind of weeks or months ago, feeling my way through what I'm going to share with you. But I'm going to be really
Okay,
vulnerable. So
thank
when
you.
I fell pregnant and we had the family that we've been hoping to have for some time, I made the decision to step back from my job, and I became increasingly tetchy, I think would be the word, frustrated.
Hmm.
Something wasn't being nourished
Hmm.
in me. And although I wouldn't have been able to say it with such words, what was happening was that the curiosity and learning drive that I have inside me, one of my core values, wasn't being nourished in parenthood. Many other of my values were, but that was not. And so I found that my MBA studies, even though I wasn't working, I was doing an MBA, that felt like an absolute lifeline.
Mm,
It was addressing, it was giving me back one of the values that was missing. And it was also becoming part of my identity. So my identity shifted from, senior leader in employment type role,
mm,
as it had been before. My identity kind of shifted into to actually, I'm going to say this and it's going to be controversial, just a mother, which now is not how I feel. But at the time back then,
hmm.
my identity felt like, okay, now I'm just a mother. I mean, how loaded is that
Mm,
self talk? Um, and then found that actually I am both a thriving mum and an MBA student, shifted my identity again. But it wasn't the identity shift that made the difference, just because my core value was being nourished again. And then the transition into being a business owner, again, my identities shifted a number of times during that time.
yeah,
I'm a business owner, I'm a consultant, I'm a coach. My identity shifted during that time, but my values really haven't shifted at all. They are still
yeah,
fundamentally there underneath. Each of those choices, even if I may not have been able to articulate it as such, was a values led choice.
Thank you for sharing that,
Mm.
Juliet. Um, so what I'm taking from that, there's something really important about understanding our own values, what makes us tick, basically, what's important to us, what is it that we need to feel fulfilled as a person. It's going to be different for all of us, but doing a bit of work around, right, what's important to me, what makes me tick, and therefore in this different role or new role, understanding how that fulfills some of those or maybe all of those values. But if there's some that are missing, it's thinking, okay, where else can I nourish myself with what I
Yeah,
need? And that might be things that are outside of work. So for you,
yeah,
curiosity and learning was really important. You did an MBA. There could have been other things that you did
of
within
course.
there. You could have gone, right, I'm going to, I don't know how you do this with small children, read a book a week or listen to something. Like there's different
Yeah,
ways to
of course. Yeah,
do that. But the fundamental principle for anybody listening is, what are my values? What do I need in order to fulfill
yeah,
them? And then there's a question about, okay, in this new role, challenge, whatever that shift in work looks like, how do I make sure that I'm fulfilling all of them?
yeah. And I think hidden within that, interesting conversation to be had about what we mean about being a leader as well. So if we're talking about a leadership identity shifting as we're maybe taking a step back or a step down for a period of time through choice or kind of the way life worked out, there's sometimes an assumption that in order to be a leader, we need to have a job title which grants us the permission to consider ourselves a leader.
Mm,
But actually, that isn't the reality. All of us lead in different ways.
yeah.
And so you can reframe what is that identity I'm stepping into? What is the identity that I'm leaving behind? And yes, there might be a grief process. It might also be an honoring. How do I honor who I was?
Mm,
And then how do I reframe that into I'm a leader in, because I don't need permission to be a leader. I'm a leader in something that I'm passionate about, something I'm knowledgeable about, something where I'm having an impact still, whatever that might be. You don't need to let others tell you what that identity is. You can claim that for yourself, but that
mm,
takes a certain self-confidence and an
mm-hmm,
understanding of your power, your agency,
mm,
to know that you don't need permission. You just claim it.
yeah. I also wonder if there's something, as you were talking about, like the status that goes with a leadership title and
Yeah.
how that is or isn't important and how that sits within values. And there's also something about habits that you get into. I have a colleague that for many years had a really busy, high powered role and has moved into, on paper, an equally high powered role, but actually the workload and the busy culture is different, where they
Mm-hmm.
do get to leave on time and they can go to yoga on a Thursday at 5:30 and things. And they're really struggling with that, even though that
Mm.
is a lot of the things that they have wished for in their previous really busy role, and that actually internally their status feels like it has shifted when status was an
Mm.
important thing for them. I don't believe that externally anything has changed in terms of how they are viewed by others.
Which is fascinating, isn't it? It kind of leads us to the conclusion that the way we feel about things isn't necessarily influenced by the environment or the circumstances in which we sit. It's influenced by our thoughts. And
Mm,
so if our thoughts are, and I don't know what those thoughts in this particular circumstance might be, but they might be something like, it's unfair that I'm getting to leave to go to yoga at 5:30 when I know my colleagues back in my previous role wouldn't have even dreamed this was
yeah,
possible. Or I need to keep this secret because actually a high-powered leader doesn't do that. If our
yeah,
thoughts are creating a world of monologue of the narrative that we live with in our heads, which that's what triggers the emotion, whatever that might be, the
yeah.
kind of the discomfort.
And with that, I suppose there's something about noticing what that discomfort is. And it's hard,
Mm,
this is hard to do on your own, but with a mentor, friend, colleague, coach,
yeah.
it's unpicking what is going on there that is making you feel uncomfortable, because I'd be pretty certain that that somehow connects back to values.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. Yeah.
Mm,
And a lot of us um, have something to do with hard work that's been built into us from an early
yeah,
age, not all. But there's something about the culture in which we live where we need to be working hard and we need to be seen to be working
yeah,
hard. And that may not be a core value. It's not a core value of mine. And yet it's something that I live and breathe and fight against every day
believe,
because
yeah,
the culture in which we live tends to tell us you need to be working hard, you need to be busy, that badge of
yeah,
busy that we've talked about
yeah,
before.
which,
And so when I know secretly, actually, I'm skipping off to a cafe to do some work and, I can feel the guilt kicking in, I have to consciously go, no, no,
mm,
no guilt
but
needed. I just need a really good flat
yeah,
white right now.
and even your language, skipping off,
Yeah.
not, I don't know, driving
Well, I think of
to,
myself as, yeah, no, I think of
bunking
myself as
off.
literally skipping down the road with joy. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
so there's a really interesting interplay here between our core values, our identity, the way society
Yeah.
still, despite all the shifts that we've seen, there's still
Yeah.
expectations that society puts on us. And so unpicking the root of why it is that this transition that you might be contemplating or midway through, where are the sources of the discomfort or the feeling of it
Yeah.
not quite fitting
Yeah.
at the moment?
And then
Mm,
from doing that bit of thinking, there's perhaps then, in the way that in your example, Juliet, you talked about, your need for curiosity and learning. If you can identify what's missing and what you need, then you can figure out what might be some of the things that you'll do in order to um, fulfill that need. So, for
yeah,
example, I think it was the listener that suggested this topic had talked about not feeling connected. And if
yeah.
if that was something like, what are the things that you do in order to feel connected again?
Mm.
Um,
That's an interesting one because not automatically, but often when you step away from a senior leadership role and you step into a different organization, or you may be in a different part of the country, you've moved to be closer to your caring needs, or moved to be closer to your dream of where you want to be, depending on what's pulling you in that direction. There is a moment there where you do, unless you take a lot of effort, you sever yourself inadvertently from the network that you had before.
yeah.
I'm sure you've probably seen this because you've done geographical moves
Mm,
through your career as well, haven't you? Where there's a sense that if you don't make the effort, I'm going to lose touch with this group. And sometimes that's fine. You can come back to them later. Sometimes you can move on to something else, a community or a network that's serving you now rather than served you in the
yeah.
past. But again, there's an intentionality around this, which is really helpful, I think.
Yeah. And there isn't a right or wrong, but if I think about my circumstances where I lived in London, very close to London, I could be there every day, connecting with people. I could go to networking events after work, I'd go breakfast, I'd go lunch. Um, and then I moved to the southwest of the UK, to a much smaller place. But at the same time, there was a pandemic and people's
Mm,
working patterns have changed. And so I don't think I like the analogy of like doors closing. It's more about different chapters, I think. And
mm,
actually, I do have to be, and I enjoy being deliberate about keeping in touch with people that we'll do on Zoom or a WhatsApp call. But I think that the world of work is different as well. So there's more than one thing going on, but it's thinking about, well, who are the people that you want to be connected to, and
mm.
what can you offer them? What it comes back to energy, I think, and kind of like, where do you get the joy in the conversations that you're having?
Yeah,
So I think I'm thinking as I'm talking with this in terms of a sideways step and making sure you're feeling connected. You have to be deliberate about it. And years ago, I applied to do VSO, and there was a network mapping exercise that we did on the basis that you're going to go and live in a country on your own. You're not going to have any networks. You're not going to know anybody. And it was called a me map. And you mapped out all the things in your current network. And then when you got to your new place, you could identify all the things that you needed from your networks and then go out and find
mm,
those people. And actually, I've done that exercise when I moved locations, that was
mm.
helpful in going, oh, what do I need? And then helpful in terms of being strategic about how I recreate that network and think about where I bring value to other people. So
Yeah,
there's definitely something very deliberate about doing that, based on, back to values and what you need as a person.
yeah. Yeah, we actually did an episode fairly recently on networking and networks, so I'll put a link to that in the notes, I think, because I
Mm,
think a lot of that's relevant. And there's a little bit of an eye to the future as well, isn't there? There's a sense of what do I need now to map that out? You know, I'm making this transition. What do I need to make sure that I'm resourced and feeling really kind of fulfilled and positive about life?
yeah,
There's also a look to the future. So in some circumstances, these transitions are intentionally a temporary, and temporary can be many
yeah,
years, but there is a sense of I'm coming into this season of life or season of my career. I'm planning to take a step back or a step down or a step sideways rather than up the hierarchy, because there might be another season coming
yeah,
up where actually I do want to relaunch myself up into a more traditional kind of leadership kind of career trajectory. So there's a look ahead as well as you're doing that network mapping. Who is it that I need to know now or keep in touch with now? Not just because we're going to trade favors until I come back in, but
hmm.
because I want to keep my my kind of networks live and current enough that when I am ready to step back up or step back in, that's ready for me to just step into that conversation rather than letting it kind of go a little bit fallow.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I was guilty of that. Probably I didn't do that as
Oh,
intentionally as
do you know though, we
honest.
all, I think it's a real task juggling like like
Yeah,
oh my God, who am I and what are my values? And then who do like there's lots that we've talked about in this episode. So I think there's
yeah,
something there around s slowing down and just thinking thoughtfully about what's possible and what you need. But I think you're stepping back for there's a reason why you're stepping back, which connects back to like might be where you are in your life and your values. And there's a sort of slow and deliberate way of figuring out what you want, and some of
yeah,
those network connections are part of that. And from my own experience, it's pretty much impossible. You can't stay in touch with everybody that you would like to stay in touch with and do the other things
yeah,
as well. But you don't, it doesn't always have to be conversations. It can be um, if you've got an email newsletter or you're posting things within like LinkedIn
yeah.
or Instagram, people often feel connected, and you can feel connected to other people through some of those
And
interactions.
it's amazing how you can rekindle a connection many years later as well. And so I think if you're doing that, it's extra important you're doing it with genuine curiosity and offering value, not I'm going to go straight back in and ask for a favor.
Yeah.
But there's, you know, given that, there's no reason why you can't rekindle a contact that you've lost touch with for many, many years.
Yeah.
There's another phase to this that
Hmm.
I hear people talk about, and I know I've experienced myself, which is when you have taken that step back or that step down, after a certain amount of time, there comes this little fear that enters the mind, which is the skills are fading. I'm de-skilling
Yeah.
by being in this role. That's obviously linked to confidence. It's very rare that actually your skills are fading. It might just be you're not practicing certain things as much anymore. They will come back later on. And there's something about having the ability to keep up to date with things, and some of that's around technology, I guess, but a lot of it's also around broader general professional development.
Hmm.
And you might be in a circumstance where you don't have the same budget that you did before professional development, but making sure that you are in a way that feels doable. It's not overloading a lot of, you know, on your time given your other responsibilities at this season of life, keeping up to date with some of those skills, some of the new trends, new senses of what's going on in your sector. And that can be through podcasts. It doesn't need to be a full MBA like I did. It can be through podcasts, reading books, keeping in touch with people, keeping on LinkedIn. But there's something about building that bank of skills, keeping them up to date so that you're ready
Yeah.
if when you want to step back in, that's ready. Um, and then partnered with that, actually, there's something about maintaining a sense of your own value. So I know for me and a couple of other people I've talked to around this topic, there was a really strong urge of, well, I just need to make sure I'm reskilling in this area. So therefore I'll volunteer for free, which is fine. I love volunteering. Volunteering is really important,
Mm.
but not when it actually fills your life and you're not getting resource
Mm.
back that you can feed, you know, into your family or your other caring responsibilities. And then a similar mirror image to that is even though I have a less senior role than I did before, I'm going to overperform at every opportunity to prove myself. But actually, you're now operating at a level which is much higher than you're being paid for.
Mm.
Um, and so there's a sense of keeping a sense of your own value so that you can balance, yes, I'd like to do some volunteer work, but only in these hours. Or
Yeah.
yes, I'm happy to step up for this particular project because I want to showcase and demonstrate my skills. But actually, I'm not going to just do a job that's 3 grades more senior because, I want to
Yeah.
prove myself. I'm not being paid for it. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
something about making sure you've got that in check, I
Yeah.
think. I don't know,
Agree.
Lucy, have you ever felt that?
I think I think that that's a two-way street, that it can be really easy to take a development opportunity and
Mm,
actually almost be being exploited because there isn't enough budget
yes.
somewhere else. And as the person offering that development opportunity, it's being very candid about what it is and
Yeah.
why it is, and not getting someone to volunteer for something which actually should be a paid for role.
Yes.
So there's a grey
Yeah.
area there, especially when somebody really wants the opportunity to step up. But that's a conversation and a two-way street, I think.
Yeah.
I think there's something as well within the the stepped back role that you're doing. Like, where do you want to go next? It might be that you want to step back in. It might be that you can't think of anything worse and want to go and do something completely different. So with that learning and development piece, it is, and maybe this was kind of implicit in what you said, but it's back to, who am I? What makes me happy? What am I good at? What do I want to
Yeah.
do next? It doesn't, there's, I feel that we've talked a bit about an assumption that you're stepping out in order to step back, but you
That may
you
not be
might
true.
choose not to do that. You might
Yeah.
choose to step out and step on to something entirely different. So with that learning and
Yeah.
development, what do you need for next, whatever next looks like, and to stick to your guns and get the skills, or do the reading, listen to the podcast, whatever that is, to help equip you for whatever your next is, and not fall into the
Yes.
trap of, I've stepped out and I'm going to step back to where I was before, because you'll have experienced a lot in that time, and that might not be the right step for you anymore.
Yeah. And again, a little bit of an assumption under that is that you know what might come next. A lot of that learning and development, in my experience, is just figuring out what might be on the menu for
Mm,
what could come next. And
mm,
and that clarity comes as you start to explore and
yeah.
kind of do some part-time work or some volunteer work or whatever it might be in the new kind of area, and you figure out actually, yeah, this is or isn't what I expected or what I want. So yeah.
And for me, I think that my kind of main learning point from having this conversation is about understanding yourself. Who am I? What do I need? What makes me happy? And
Hmm.
being curious to go and explore
Mm,
what different versions of fulfilling what you need might look like. And that
yeah.
can also involve reconnecting with old networks, but that can involve making new networks of the people with the skills and experience that might give you new insights about where you may want to go next, or
Yeah.
maybe insights about the different options that you might have that you haven't even thought of.
Yes. I don't think many of us have a career that we planned out sort of on leaving school. It mostly unfolds by complete chance.
Yeah,
So yes, a
100%
lot of
agree.
options out there that you might not have considered.
And I was talking to a client recently who was telling me about their daughter who is at university, and some of the things that they were studying for jobs that don't even exist yet, around ethics, around AI, that don't exist now. And I was,
Yeah.
um, well, that opened my curiosity to all the different things that all of us can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that comes to mind here, I probably should have said it at the beginning of the episode, but hey,
Mm.
whatever. I think that everything that we've talked about, or most of what we've talked about, is equally relevant. If you're leading a team and you think that there are people in your team who are navigating this, so maybe you've got people in your team who were
Yeah.
in more senior positions and they're on your team in a less senior position. This is a great episode to have understood maybe some of the things that they're navigating. B, anyone who's approaching or thinking about retirement. This isn't all the same, but actually it's interesting. I think there are a number of conversations that I've had, people are sort of 5-8 years away from retirement and are starting to think through this identity shift and where the challenge is going to come from as well. So there's some commonality there, I think, as well. And then the third group that comes to mind is people that I've talked to who have said to me, I think I should. And anytime you use the word should, big alarm bells start ringing as to what's the mindset behind that should. I think I should be moving up, but I don't really want to. And it's that figuring out. So all of what we've talked about, figuring out what you want, what your values are, how you want your life to kind of, the pace that you want, the season that you're in. Actually, I think everything we've talked about is pretty much useful for those scenarios too. Maybe you can think of other scenarios, Lucy, as well. We've used one example to explore something that I think is a bit wider.
Yeah, maybe. I agree. And that word should, I should do this or I should do that. I've talked about it before. That should is irrelevant. What do you want, love, or are curious about? That's the line of thinking to take, not what other people expect.
So anytime you're thinking I should, or I have to, or I need to, or anything like that, that should, there's no judgment, but it's like, ooh, what's going on under there? Who is telling me I should? Who is telling me I need to? Who is telling me I have to? And that who might be a person, it might be a part of society or part of your upbringing, or just that narrator that lives inside your head. And aren't they lovely?
That helpful little gremlin that tells you, keeps you safe.
All these things that keeps you very safe and prevents you from really exploring the world and fulfilling your full potential in the process. So exactly. So as we wrap up this conversation, what are the key things that you think you'd like people to hold in their mind as we finish up?
I think I'm going to pick up on that last point about should. And it's all about thinking about, who are you? What do you need and want? What brings you joy? What are you good at? What will fulfill your working life? And then make some of the choices about what you do around that. And yes, listen to what other people say and other people's opinions, but you don't have to act on them. Stay true to yourself and what will make your working life what you want it to be. What about you? That got a bit philosophical. I wasn't expecting that.
That's good. I like it. So I think obviously we talked a lot about identity, we talked about values. So realizing that values are probably going to stay with you. So understanding what those are as kind of anchors, quite helpful. Understanding that your identity will shift and change. And actually you can do that by reframing it yourself as well. And understanding the difference between those two, I think, is really key. And then the other thing that comes to mind is yes, we've talked about being intentional. We've probably made this sound like about a 15-step plan, Lucy. I think there's also a sense of just listen to your intuition and whatever next step occurs to you is probably a good place to start. You're not going to have all this mapped out. You can be intentional and you don't need to have a full plan.
I agree. And explore, but do some action, even a little bit, because if you can keep thinking about it, but you don't learn anything until you try taking a step, and that step might not be the right step, and that's okay. But take some action towards what you think might be the thing you want to do.
It's that combination of cognitive strategic thinking, intuition, and taking action. I'm going to be sharing a new model that I'm creating called strategic flow around those three things. So we'll save that for another episode. But yes, taking action is really important. Fantastic. I think we'll wrap up our time together now. Anything else you want to add, Luce, before we finish up?
No, I'm being very thoughtful about this content for my own work.
Well, I think this is one of those episodes where we don't want to just tell our own story, but actually us being vulnerable about things that we've transitioned in our careers is hopefully helping people.
I hope so.
There we go. So thank you for spending this time with us. I'm Juliet Corbett, an executive coach and strategist, working one-to-one with senior leaders.
And I'm Lucy Gower, a facilitator, trainer and coach, helping leaders develop high-performing teams. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with colleagues and help leverage the impact of the Quiet Leadership Revolution.